over 7 decades, we have built a relationship anchored on mutual respect, trust, and shared aspiration.
Under this new framework for the transfer of defense equipment, Secretary Teodoro and I signed today statement on the further promotion of defense equipment and technology cooperation. We also agreed to move forward with discussions aimed at realizing comprehensive equipment cooperation.
In international politics, great powers rarely compete only for territory. They compete for something far more important, the authority to decide the rules. That is what makes the latest dispute involving China, Japan, and the Philippines so significant. On the surface, this appears to be a technical disagreement over maritime boundaries and exclusive economic zones. Japan and the Philippines began discussing maritime delimitation in waters east of Taiwan, a process that sovereign states routinely conduct under international law. But China's response transformed what should have been a diplomatic and legal discussion into a much larger geopolitical debate. Beijing argued that these negotiations could not simply proceed as an ordinary bilateral matter. Instead, China asserted that its own rights and interests had been ignored, raising a question that extends far beyond maritime boundaries. Is China merely defending what it considers its sovereign interests? Or is Beijing attempting to establish something much larger? The authority to determine who can negotiate, cooperate, and establish political legitimacy in the Indo-Pacific. Because this controversy is not ultimately about drawing lines on a map. It is about whether China can position itself as the political gatekeeper of regional diplomacy, determining not only who controls territory, but who has the authority to make decisions in Asia's most strategically important waters. In international politics, disagreements over territory are common. Disagreements over who has the right to negotiate are much rarer. Yet that is exactly what unfolded in the Indo-Pacific in late May 2026.
Our discussions reaffirmed our commitment to further advance cooperation across key areas, including economic partnership, energy resilience, decarbonization, cooperation in defense and security, maritime matters, as well as emerging and future-oriented sectors. We had meaningful exchanges on regional and global issues, including challenges that are now emerging in the Indo-Pacific region, and of course the developments in the Middle East and their impact on energy security.
On May 29, Japan and the Philippines announced that they would begin formal negotiations to delimit parts of their exclusive economic zones and continental shelves in accordance with international law. For most countries, this would have been considered a routine diplomatic process. Maritime delimitation negotiations occur regularly around the world, helping neighboring states clarify boundaries, manage resources, and reduce the risk of future conflict. But within days, China reacted with unusual force. Beijing declared that the planned negotiations were, in its words, completely illegal and null and void. China's foreign ministry argued that the area under discussion included waters east of Taiwan, which Beijing considers part of China's sovereign territory and maritime jurisdiction. Shortly afterward, China's Coast Guard announced that it had conducted what it described as law enforcement patrols east of Taiwan specifically in response to the Japan-Philippines negotiations. This was not merely a diplomatic protest. It was a strategic signal, and the message was unmistakable. Beijing was suggesting that two sovereign countries could not negotiate issues affecting China's interests without first taking China's position into account. The response stunned many observers because that is not how modern international diplomacy normally works. Japan quickly pushed back. Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara stated that any agreement reached between Japan and the Philippines would not be legally binding on third parties, adding that Tokyo saw no issue whatsoever under international law. Taiwan's response was even stronger. Taipei declared that China has no right to interfere in Taiwan's territorial sovereignty and sovereign rights over its relevant maritime areas. Taiwan further insisted that Beijing had no authority to speak on Taiwan's behalf regarding maritime boundaries or sovereignty claims. At first glance, this may appear to be a technical dispute involving maritime law, exclusive economic zones, and competing territorial claims. But beneath the legal arguments lies a much larger geopolitical question. Is China simply defending what it considers its sovereign rights? Or is Beijing attempting to establish something far more consequential? The authority to determine who can negotiate, cooperate, and make strategic decisions in the Indo-Pacific. To understand this, we first need to understand what Japan and the Philippines were actually discussing. At the center of these talks are something called exclusive economic zones, or EEZs. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, commonly known as UNCLOS, coastal countries are entitled to exercise special economic rights within 200 nautical miles of their coastline. These rights include fishing, energy exploration, and the development of marine resources. But geography is rarely simple. In many parts of the world, the maritime zones claimed by neighboring countries overlap. When this happens, countries usually negotiate directly with one another to establish mutually acceptable boundaries. This process, known as maritime delimitation, is a normal and widely accepted practice under international law. That is precisely what Japan and the Philippines announced they intended to do. However, the waters east of Taiwan are not just another maritime space. They sit at the crossroads of some of the most important strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific. The area overlaps with maritime claims associated with Taiwan, lies close to key sea lanes, and occupies a critical position between Japan's southwestern islands and the northern Philippines. Taiwan itself quickly responded by emphasizing that any negotiations between Japan and the Philippines must respect Taiwan's own sovereign rights and maritime claims. At the same time, Taipei made another point equally clear. China has no authority to speak on Taiwan's behalf. This distinction is important. Under normal diplomatic practice, sovereign states negotiate directly with one another. Agreements reached between two countries do not automatically bind third parties, and third-party approval is not required to begin negotiations. That principle is one of the foundations of modern international diplomacy, which is precisely why China's objection attracted so much attention. The controversy was never only about where a maritime boundary should be drawn. It was also about who has the authority to participate in that conversation in the first place. To understand why Beijing reacted so strongly, we need to step away from legal terminology and look at the situation from China's strategic perspective. For China, this is not simply a dispute about maritime boundaries or legal procedures. It is about geopolitics, security, and the balance of power in East Asia. From Beijing's point of view, the waters east of Taiwan are not a distant or peripheral area. They are directly connected to China's territorial claims, national security concerns, and long-term strategic interests. This is why Chinese officials and state media describe the Japan-Philippines negotiations as not merely problematic, but fundamentally unacceptable. China's response reveals three important assumptions that increasingly shape its view of regional affairs. First, Beijing believes that major security issues in East Asia inevitably involve China. Whether the issue concerns Taiwan, the East China Sea, or the South China Sea, China's position is that its interests cannot be separated from regional decision-making. Second, China expects neighboring countries to take Chinese strategic interests into account before pursuing policies that could affect Beijing's security environment. From this perspective, negotiations conducted without considering China's claims are viewed not as neutral diplomatic acts, but as challenges to Chinese interests. Third, China views the growing strategic cooperation among regional countries with increasing concern. As Japan, the Philippines, the United States, and other regional actors deepen their security ties, Beijing sees not isolated bilateral relationships, but the gradual emergence of a broader strategic alignment that could constrain China's influence. This helps explain why China's response extended beyond diplomatic protests. Beijing deployed Coast Guard vessels, launched maritime law enforcement operations east of Taiwan, and repeatedly emphasized its sovereignty and jurisdiction over the disputed waters. In other words, China's real concern may not be the maritime negotiations themselves. The greater concern is the precedent they establish. Because if countries in the Indo-Pacific can increasingly coordinate, negotiate, and build strategic partnerships without China's participation or approval, then Beijing risks losing something more important than territory: its ability to shape the political order emerging around it. Let's look at the map. The waters east of Taiwan are not just another stretch of ocean. They sit at the center of one of the most important strategic regions in the world. For decades, military planners have referred to this area as part of the First Island Chain, a chain of islands stretching from Japan through Taiwan and into the northern Philippines. This geography forms a natural barrier between China's coastline and the wider Pacific Ocean. For China, these waters represent something critically important: access to the open Pacific. Any country that seeks to become a major naval power must be able to operate beyond its immediate coastline. And the waters east of Taiwan provide one of China's most important gateways to the wider ocean. For the United States, however, this same region forms part of its forward defensive perimeter in Asia. For Japan, the area lies close to its southwestern islands and constitutes a vital security frontier. And for the Philippines, the waters north and east of Luzon serve as an increasingly important strategic buffer. This helps explain why military activity in the region has intensified. Around the same time that the maritime dispute emerged, Japan reported that China's aircraft carrier Liaoning and its accompanying vessels were conducting extensive operations east of the Philippines. According to Japanese defense officials, Chinese aircraft and helicopters conducted around 170 takeoffs and landings while operating deep into the western Pacific. At the same time, Taiwan accused Chinese Coast Guard vessels of carrying out what it called provocative operations east of the island. These events are not isolated. They reflect a larger strategic reality. Every discussion about maritime rights, boundaries, and sovereignty in the waters east of Taiwan also carries military significance. Because in this part of the world, geography and strategy are inseparable. And that means that what appears to be a legal dispute on paper can quickly become a contest over military access, strategic influence, and the future balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. At this point, it becomes clear that the dispute is no longer simply about maritime boundaries. It is about competing ideas of how international relations should work. The first vision is the one most countries formally accept today. It is based on international law, especially the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. Under this framework, sovereign states are legally equal. Countries negotiate directly with one another. Disputes can be settled through international institutions or arbitration, and no state possesses an automatic right to approve or veto the decisions of another sovereign country. This is the framework that Japan and the Philippines argue they are following. But China's response reflects a different strategic logic. From Beijing's perspective, major powers possess special security interests in their surrounding regions, and neighboring countries should take those interests into account before making decisions that could affect regional stability. In this view, legitimacy is not determined solely by legal procedures or international institutions. It is also shaped by geography, power, and strategic realities. This is precisely why Taiwan's response was so important. While Taipei asked Japan and the Philippines to respect Taiwan's own maritime rights and interests, it also firmly rejected China's claim to speak on Taiwan's behalf. Taiwan's foreign ministry emphasized that China has no authority to determine Taiwan's position or negotiate its sovereign rights for it. This reveals the deeper struggle unfolding in the Indo-Pacific. The question is no longer simply, who owns which waters? The increasingly important question is, who gets to decide the rules? If China's concern is that regional countries are building strategic coalitions without its participation, then there is an uncomfortable reality for Beijing. Those coalitions are growing partly because of China's own actions. Over the past several years, tensions between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea have steadily intensified. Incidents around disputed waters, confrontations between Coast Guard vessels, and competing sovereignty claims have convinced many policymakers in Manila that the Philippines cannot manage its security challenges alone. As a result, the Philippines has accelerated its defense cooperation not only with the United States, but also with Japan, Australia, South Korea, and other regional partners. Among these relationships, the partnership between Japan and the Philippines has become particularly important. The two countries increasingly view their security environments as interconnected. They have expanded military exercises, increased intelligence sharing, strengthened maritime security cooperation, and pursued agreements that would allow their forces to operate more closely together. Japan has also provided the Philippines with coastal surveillance systems and is exploring additional defense cooperation, including maritime capabilities and military equipment transfers. From Manila's perspective, this growing partnership is not about containing China. It is about ensuring that no country can dominate the region's strategic environment alone. But from Beijing's perspective, the picture looks very different. Chinese officials increasingly see these partnerships not as isolated bilateral relationships, but as parts of a larger strategic network developing around China's maritime periphery. This creates what political scientists call a security dilemma. Actions taken by one country to increase its own security cause other countries to feel less secure, prompting them to strengthen their own defenses and partnerships in response. Throughout history, great powers have rarely been satisfied with controlling territory alone. They have also sought something less visible, but often more important, recognition of their special status and influence within their own regions. Before the First World War, Imperial Germany sought not only military strength, but also political deference from its European neighbors. Germany expected its growing power to be reflected in the diplomatic and strategic choices of other states. In East Asia during the 1930s and 1940s, Imperial Japan promoted the idea of a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a regional order in which neighboring countries would operate within a system shaped primarily by Japanese interests and leadership. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union established a sphere of influence across Eastern Europe, where many important political and strategic decisions were expected to align with Moscow's security priorities. The point of these examples is not to argue that is identical to Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, or the Soviet Union. History never repeats itself so neatly. The more important lesson is that great powers often seek more than security or territory. They seek recognition of what they believe to be their legitimate regional authority. They expect neighboring states to acknowledge their interests, accommodate their concerns, and operate within a political order that reflects their growing power. And historically, tensions emerge when neighboring countries reject those expectations. This may help explain why the dispute between China, Japan, and the Philippines has become about far more than maritime boundaries. Because beneath the legal arguments and diplomatic statements lies a much older geopolitical question: can a rising great power persuade its neighbors to accept its preferred regional order? Or will those neighbors resist and build alternative arrangements of their own? That question has shaped international politics for centuries, and it may now be shaping the future of the Indo-Pacific. The dispute between China, Japan, and the Philippines is not ultimately about a maritime boundary. It is about a larger question that will define the future of Asia. Can sovereign states negotiate their own future independently, or must regional diplomacy first receive the approval of the region's strongest power? In the Indo-Pacific of the 21st century, that question may prove more important than any disputed reef or maritime boundary. If you found this analysis valuable, share your perspective in the comments. Your insights help deepen the conversation and sharpen our understanding of evolving regional dynamics. Thank you, and we will see you soon in our next geopolitical discussion.